Northeast 1450 WOL Radio.
Thanks for rolling with us, folks. Our guest is Baba Lumumba from the Moja House in Washington, D.C. And we're having a discussion about black culture and pop culture. And he says there's a vacuum. And when there's a vacuum, we just suck in the regular pop culture and all its negative energy that's with it, and which is often detrimental to, especially our youngsters, to the black community. So, Baba Lumumba, I heard you rattle off about the entertainment industry and all of what we see on television and stuff like that, and probably the music as well, you probably inferred to. But is anybody forcing us to do what we see on TV or what we hear in the music in some of these rap songs?
Yeah, Cal. It turns out that they are forcing us by we don't have an option. We don't have, in other words, when we don't have our own frame of reference, we can't refer to it. We can't use it. It's not there. It was taken from us, so we can't use it. We have to operate within his frame of reference because that's all he leaves us with. And that's what he projects in his media. That's when we buy something or we look at television. What we're seeing is the options he provides for us. That's why I mentioned this thing about the Kwanzaa not being in the reason. One of the few things that we've been able to break away from this has been Kwanzaa, because it begins to establish our own frame of reference, our own set of values, our own way of looking at things. And that he guards against. And a lot of us are invested in his frame of reference. So he has a lot of help within our community to keep us away from developing our own frame of reference or trying to understand what that is or working towards achieving it or reestablishing it or understanding it. Culture is identity. That you can't separate the two. And if you don't have a culture, you don't have an identity. So you take on whatever's around you, whatever's there for you to absorb, and you try to create an identity. But you can't. You have to reestablish. You have to connect with who you were before you took the identity. Before the identity was taken from you.
But let me interrupt you here. But many of us don't know who we were.
Well, sure, we know. We know a lot more than we used to know. We actually have now the genetic capacity to connect with the very tribes that we came from. So we have, and we have all this scholarship that has defined us. We have Chikata Diop's work that tells us we connect with Egypt. We've made tremendous strides in defining ourselves culturally, but we have all this resistance about it. We have tremendous strides. We got African religions that are practiced in this country based on their traditions, and we have many, many sources of coming up with our identity, but we have this resistance and this fear on our part. Because when we adapted his way of life and his culture, we automatically made ours inferior. In other words, when you do that, when you don't have your own, then you copy his, and copying him becomes your ideal, becomes what you do. You're comfortable there, so So it's no real mystery.
Right. But let me interrupt you again here. Again about our culture, because you have some folks in our community, they don't want to identify with anything that's African. I was just reading a post a moment ago, and the person says, I'm not African. My parents were from North Carolina, and their parents are from North Carolina, and we go back 3 generations of North Carolinians. So
well, the fact that you can only go back 3 generations means that there was an interruption there. There was something that happened that didn't allow you to go back. What was that something? How about slavery?
What I'm saying is, though, you and I see that, and I'm sure some of the people who are listening to us see that as well. But for this particular young lady, she doesn't make that connection, or she refuses to make that connection. What's going on?
Yeah, you said it. She refuses to make that connection. 2 and 2 is 4, no matter what math you do. So whether she refuses to or not, it's just the question is, why does she have that resistance? Why is that so threatening to her? Why is the obvious so threatening to her? If you're an African American, you don't want to be an African American. You don't want to be a black person. You're looking. What are you going to do? Take all the mirrors out your house? You know, you're going to abandon your style. You're going to stop going to the church. And when you exhibit that style of your being a Baptist, and it has that sway, and it comes, and you look back and say, well, that comes from Africa. You know, when you start doing, there's no way around it, Carl. And you can't spend time trying to convince people of the obvious. You know, they tend not to believe it. They're going to act that way. But, some of us have to accept it and go forward with it, because there's no way out. There's no way out. You're going to have to develop a culture and identity that precedes your captivity. The imposition of somebody else's culture and way of life. And we're at a point now where this is not only critical for our people, it's critical for the whole world. Because what we see in the white man's way of life is a destruction of the very planet that we're on. It's not only our destruction, but it's the destruction of the entire earth. Ignoring climate change, we'll just use that. But you can go further than climate change. You could talk about artificial intelligence. You can talk about the dishonesty with respect to democracy. I give you an example. We went through this thing with Donald Trump recently of the impeachment stuff, and you saw not a thing, and you kept hearing the Republicans saying, well, the Democrats are trying to negate the election of Donald Trump was elected. But no one ever said Donald Trump was elected by the minority of a people. What is a society that claims that the minority of people is a democracy? That's not a democracy. Not one Democrat pointed out that contradiction. That Donald Trump
hold that thought right there. You're right, but hold that thought right there. But yet you have many people who look like me and you didn't vote and say they're not going to vote because it doesn't change anything. They'd rather let Billy Bob decide how their money's spent. What do you say to those folks?
Well, I mean, that's another problem. Sometimes voting makes sense and sometimes it doesn't make sense. Now, you have to vote against Donald Trump because you see what he's doing, not only to you, but to the rest of the world. So, but, there are times when voting and to say that our politicians will be our answers, of course, is a lie. Our politicians have never saved us. And that's true. But so I wouldn't dismiss that notion, but I would qualify it by saying sometimes voting is very important because there is clearly a choice that you have to make that is in your interest. When you have those choices that are in your interest, then you vote because it's dumb not to do that. But when let's say Tweedledee and Tweedledum, when the politicians don't really matter, then they're the lesser of two evils, etc., which is often where you find yourself, then the argument against voting makes all the sense in the world, that it doesn't matter, because sometimes it doesn't matter and sometimes it does.
All right. Critical thinking, that's what you're calling for. Got some people want to talk to you, Baba Lumumba. 800-450-7876. Anthony's in the district. He's on line 2. Anthony, you're on with Baba Lumumba.
Hello, gentlemen. Great question, and I'm enjoying the show. Baba Lumumba, I got a question to ask you, sir. What do you think about how hip-hop has been weaponized against us? I mean, when they promote people like Nicki Minaj and Cardi B, Lizzo, and the images like, I know Snoop Dogg was just in that controversy with Gayle King, but a couple of years ago, he shows up to the MTV Music Awards with 2 black women in chains. And I just think that this stuff is destroying our youth, and they unwittingly participating in the destruction of our people worldwide. What's your opinion, sir?
I agree with you 100%, brother, that one of the examples of the very negative influence of pop culture is what hip-hop has been turned into. Now, interesting enough, hip-hop started out to be it started out to come from the movement, come from the revolutionary end of the movement. It started out by criticizing the system, which is what we did a lot of our music in the 60s. But, it has become weaponized against us, just like you said. There's no question, but it's a perfect example about the damaging effects of pop culture. But it's the power of the society in which we live in is always able to do that. It's able to do that against us unless we understand what's being done. And then, black people operate very individualistically. When somebody's a rapper, someone comes along and says, I can make some money telling black people to kill each other. I can make some money degrading ourselves. I can make some money doing that. They're going to do that. Because, and again, it traces back to lack of culture. When you don't have a strong identity with each other, it's easy to just betray each other. It's easy to say it don't matter. If you define liberation, you define progress as my well-being, my interest, the nicer car that I drive, the home that I get, then any white man who comes along and tells you, look, I'll give you one leg up on this, brother, if you sing about this instead of this, and I'll circulate your records. I'll make sure that you make some money. So we have to.
Let me jump in here, Baba Lumumba. Why don't other ethnic groups do that? Why can't they be bought off?
Because they have a culture. They have a strong ability to identify with each other. They speak their language. They know who they are collectively. We don't have, and that's the point that I'm trying to make. Culture is key. It's central to our ability to operate in concert with each other. For example, Carl, we talk a lot about history, knowing our history. If you compare history to culture as a motivator, you find culture is identity. It's what you are. History is information. It's something about you. Culture is the bond between people. History is the connection between people. Culture it compels action. Culture compels action. When you're part of a culture, your actions are compelled by that culture. You're firm in your understanding of who you are. When you don't have a culture, then you're not firm and you're not compelled to action.
All right, hold that thought right there. We got to take a short break. Anthony, if you have a follow-up, stay with us as well. 800-450-7876. You too can join this conversation with Baba Lumumba. We'll take your calls after this short break right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power.